I very much believe that Bitcoin on medium exchange is going to get there. Now, what portion of the market does that take? That's going to be different in different areas of the world, right? You see it in Zambia right now, and the phone wallets will work because there's a lot of small businesses there. There's a lot of merchants that are single owners and running a small shop, right? And they're a Blink wallet, a wallet of Satoshi, Strike even is in Zambia, like that'll work for them. And then we can kind of slowly move them towards self-custodial solutions as well as they continue to take on more Bitcoin. So I think it's just a matter of time. We as individuals need to continue educating, and showing what's in it for merchants.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Adam Copperthwaite to the podcast. Adam is co-founder of Bitcoin Victoria Falls in Zambia, Bitcoin Montserrat, Blue Hen Bitcoin, and a snowboarder. Welcome to the Bitcoin Edge, Adam.
Thanks for having me, Paula. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear about your story and how you got into Bitcoin.
Yeah, I guess quickly I heard about it in like 2009. I think my buddy who used to hack video game consoles and give us gaming stuff and right out of high school and out of high school, he talked about it, but it was just a faint memory on that time. But really more got into it from the libertarian world, Tom Woods podcast in 2016-ish, 17-ish, and started diving deep. I really very much believe in freedom technology and libertarian principles, Austrian economics. And so, kind of started hearing about it at that time. And for a long while, it was primarily a, research and interest-based, kind of side hobby for me. But in a visit to Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador in 2022 is really where I launched myself into networking and participating and actively trying to give back to the community in whatever ways that I could. So, it's been a journey and I'm still on it, but it was a really exciting time. I spent a lot of time focusing on just understanding, right, and understanding what this could mean for the world before I felt, approximately 6 years before I actually launched into participation. And so I like to encourage others to join in participation. I think that everybody has something to offer within this space, as far as whether it's donating time, donating sats, or just participating in various capacities. It doesn't have to be a job or something active in the Bitcoin space to make a difference in the world as it relates to Bitcoin.
I love that reminder. So did you have an altcoin journey or did you get Bitcoin right away?
It's a good question. I definitely did. Hopefully it was short-lived comparatively to some others. But yeah, in the kind of 2016 time period, it was definitely exploring altcoins, and I think at that time it was ICOs was the terminology that was used. Did participate in that. I think it was around 2019, 2020 where I just had enough and kind of put everything back into Bitcoin over a period of time and focus on that solely at this point.
And how did you get involved with being the co-founder for Bitcoin Victoria Falls?
Yeah, I'm somebody who likes to go and see and experience, and I'm a world traveler. My mom gave that to me as a passion when I was a kid, and my wife and I have been to around 40 countries in both of our lives, and so I'm somebody who wants to go, see, do, experience, and when I go and see and do, I don't want to stay in a resort hotel or an all-inclusive. I want to go and I want to get an Airbnb in the community and really integrate myself and understand and listen and learn and have fun, right? That's what travel is to me. It's experiencing other cultures and understanding other people for who they are and where they've come from. And so when I saw things starting to become legal tender as it related to Bitcoin in El Salvador, my wife and I talked about just going down there and seeing what was going on. And so we did. It was, I think, 6 to 9 months after the legal tender law passed. I hadn't done much travel in Central America and was just really interested in what was going on in that area, especially in El Salvador as it relates to Bitcoin. And so we went down. We stayed in El Zonte for a week, and I started networking with Ramon down there. He participates in the Bitcoin Beat project and was also a participant in the Hope House. And then we spent a week in Santa Ana hiking the volcano and just staying in a little apartment in Santa Ana and seeing what was going on. And so when I was down there talking to Ramon and understanding, what was going on in El Zonte, I really started thinking to myself, like, well, where can I make an impact like they're making an impact here? And the Hope House being the origination of Bitcoin Beach was really inspiring for me because it was already a community based project that was giving back to the local community and the local kids. And so my mind started churning and thinking about where do I have similar connections to what the Hope House was doing, where I could use that kind of community foundation to launch something Bitcoin related. And my mind very quickly went to something called the Free Haven Community Initiative, which is a community initiative in Livingston, Zambia, that I had been donating to since around 2019, 2020 to help kids and just on nutrition, on extracurricular activities, on empowerment programs, on extra tutoring lessons and things along those lines. And so my mind went to that organization and that philanthropic initiative. And I thought that, I had seen a lot of what was actually going on in kind of the early comings of the African Bitcoin circular economies. And I just thought that'd be the perfect area of the world to try to launch an initiative like Bitcoin Beach and ultimately make the biggest impact that I possibly could by philanthropically giving back to the space in a Bitcoin education lens.
Wow, that's really amazing. So you started Bitcoin Victoria Falls, which I just want to let everybody know. So the Victoria Falls is one of the seven wonders of the world, natural wonders. It's between Zimbabwe, which is where I'm from, and Zambia, which is on the other side. And so you started Bitcoin Victoria Falls and are now educating people in Livingston, Zambia. Also, some people in Livingston are helping merchants accept Bitcoin. Tell us a little bit more about how this works.
Yeah, so co-founder Humphrey Sivingwa, he was from Lusaka, Zambia, so not from Livingston, but I got connected to him on a visit. So I first started with the Free Haven Community Initiative. I started having some meetings with the president of the board with Free Haven. They wanted me to kind of build this project in parallel to them and not necessarily integrate it right away. They wanted to kind of see how it worked. But I did use that folks within the Free Haven Community Initiative, having meetings with them, understanding what their goals and objectives are, understanding the local community a little bit better to kind of start to begin launching the project. I then connected with Bitcoin for Fairness and Anita Pasha's team, and she recommended Indeza, and at that meeting with Indeza, who's located in Lusaka and runs the Bitcoin for Fairness Lusaka program. And so I was on a trip on work in Europe, actually. And so we took another week, it was longer than that, 2 to 3 weeks of vacation and time in Africa. And so during that time, I met with Indeza in Lusaka, and he had started reaching out to the community in Lusaka to see if anybody would be willing to help to lead this project from a community leader perspective. And Humphrey stepped up, and Humphrey's been just absolutely amazing. And I think you've actually interviewed him as well and had a great conversation with him. But that's kind of how we laid the groundwork, right? It was just networking, speaking with Anita's team, speaking with Indeza's team, and eventually we found a community leader and co-founder in Humphrey. And so we started by Humphrey going down every couple of weeks to teach the project. He would go down for approximately 5 weeks at a time, teach the cohort, and then return to Lusaka. He's now moved to Livingston and is, full-time working on the project. But it's slowly evolved. We started for approximately 9 months to a year with just focusing on education. We were using the Me Premier Bitcoin curriculum, my first Bitcoin curriculum from John Dennehy and his team from El Salvador created, which was a great launching pad. And I highly recommend if anybody's looking to get started with a Bitcoin circular economy, start with education. Don't start with merchant adoption, start with education. Get people in and understanding what Bitcoin is and teach them about money, right? The great thing about the Me Premier Bitcoin curriculum is it really starts with the foundations of money. About 5 of the 6 lessons are really just on finance and money. And then 4 of the lessons really get into Bitcoin. And so that was a great launch pad for us in just spending time teaching people, as opposed to launching into trying to convince merchants to onboard this technology as a payments rail and financial infrastructure. That's where we're at today. We started launching the merchant adoption portion of our project in January 2025, so just about 4 months now. And we've been brought on about 30 to 40 businesses so far. And To do so, we hired a merchant adoption project manager who is part-time with the nonprofit. He works about 20 hours a week. Humphrey works about 40 hours a week. And Humphrey really leads the education and structures the community. And then Michael is really working hard on merchant adoption. And so it's been really successful in kind of taking that evolution of education, merchant adoption, and then, seeing where it goes from there.
Yeah, that really is amazing. And how is the circular economy, at least for spending in Bitcoin in Zambia?
I think that's always a really hard thing to assess, but if I had to put some numbers to it, I think it was really interesting what I asked Humphrey the other day. I just kind of shot him a message after I've been seeing all of these amazing merchant videos. If you haven't seen the merchant videos that they're putting out, follow us on X and Noster, Bitcoin Victoria Falls. They're really well done and really cool, and you can really get a good idea of who's being onboarded with the merchant side. But I was seeing these and how amazing of a job the team was doing. So I shot Humphrey a WhatsApp message. I was like, so, because his salary's fully Bitcoin, right? I was like, now that we're getting all these merchants on board, like how much of your life has transitioned to Sats versus fiat? And he said about 60% with all the merchants that we brought on. And hopefully that continues to grow. But so I think that's a good barometer to measure of a local person who's only paid in Bitcoin of how much can he actually then go and transact in that. And at 60%, that seems pretty high to me, at least in the first 4 months of starting this initiative. So, we have everything from barbershops to restaurants, to safari tours. A lot of the businesses right now are locally based because I think that's a great place to start. And that's where Herman from Bitcoin Akazi recommended starting was getting that local. But we have as you mentioned in this previous question, it is a phenomenal tourist area. So we are really looking forward to at some point welcoming Bitcoiners who are tourists to the area to go on safaris, to whitewater raft on the Zambezi, to zip lines, to all the national parks. And so it's this amazing area of the world that has a really good thriving local Bitcoin scene right now. And we're just excited to see what that means for tourism and those types of things as we continue to evolve this circular economy.
Wow, really amazing project. Let's bring it back to the US. You're living in the US. How much are you on the Bitcoin standard?
Yeah, it's a good. I've actually, as of January, I moved my checking account into Bitcoin. So I still have my bank account, but all of my direct deposit is straight into Bitcoin. And I am doing bill pay out of Strike to cover bills that are still in fiat. But I am trying as much as possible to move to that as a standard. All that I own assets wise is pretty much real estate, my house and Bitcoin, and then moving the checking account recently into that. My wife was a little hesitant at first, but she trusts me on, and she's read the Bitcoin standard herself. So pushing that further, hoping that we can get more merchants here in the US accepting it. And I think we're at the very, very early stages of that. It's still quite early, but I'm more optimistic than most in my estimation on bringing merchants in the United States onto a Bitcoin standard.
And why is that so important to you?
Well, I think it's actually, I like to think of things through the lens of sales. I'm in sales in my daily life, and I actually think it should be important to the merchants. There's a lot of opportunity for them on reducing fees, reducing middlemen. I think all too often it's not necessarily about, well, it is partially about what's important to me as the consumer or the customer to that merchant, right? But there's a whole world of opportunity that merchants necessarily haven't been it hasn't necessarily been explained to merchants, in my opinion, in the correct manner. And so I think it's really about again, we go back to the circular economy concept. What is it all about? Education, right? And that's really what sales is at the end of the day. It's about discovery and asking of the merchants what their objectives and their goals are as it relates to payments processing and financial transactions and treasuries, and then educating them on what the right solution is for them. And I think the challenging part when it comes to Bitcoin as it relates to merchant adoption is there's a lot of tools and a lot of nuance. And it's actually about matching the right tool within the Bitcoin space to what the merchant's goals actually are. And that takes some understanding and some time, not just a sales pitch, right? So I'm going to be going down that route here shortly, and I'll let you know more once I find out.
It's funny because talking to you, you've been in the Bitcoin space for quite a while. You didn't even go to the part about the fiat system collapsing and all of that. It's almost like you're expecting that.
Uh, collapse is a strong word. I think it's an interesting thing to assess. I think a lot of people in this space kind of talk about macro and macroeconomics and really kind of assess the landscape. And I very much agree with a lot of the general perspective as it relates to macroeconomics and what Bitcoin brings to the table. But as you can see, I'm also interested in the micro economics and the merchant adoption and medium exchange. I think that kind of comes from my sales background. It just kind of and my passion for making a difference. It's hard to make a difference on a macro scale. It's very easy to make a difference in your community or in a meeting with a merchant or at this point it's easy. I think the fascinating thing about where we're at in 2025 in the world is it's easy for me to make a difference in Africa by donating my time and my sats to an African cause and allowing them to lead. Right. That's all I've done. Sure, did I co-found the project? Absolutely. But I'm just kind of the back end support and administration to help support Humphrey. And to be quite honest with you, as of January, I've had to take on more responsibilities at my full-time job. And I've really taken a step back and allowed Humphrey to lead, right? And he's just done an amazing job at that. And the team that he's kind of brought on around him, Michael, who's doing the merchant adoption, Paul Simatende is working on our website design and some digital initiatives for us. While it was another woman in the area who's volunteering her time right now, but she's also launching an initiative for K through 12 students and the younger demographic. And so if you kind of just seed and then allow people to build and you just kind of allow and you support and lead, I think that's really where we're going to continue to see this community, this global community that is Bitcoin, thrive and make a difference in the world.
And is this a project that other people can also donate to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a project they can donate to, but they could replicate it themselves as well. That's what I always encourage people, just like I encouraged at the beginning of this conversation of just get involved where you feel passionate about. I think it's actually interesting that somebody could replicate this and you don't have to necessarily be in the location to replicate it. Now, there are some caveats with that. You need a good co-founder, a community leader that's going to be that person in the ground. And I found that in Humphrey, and that was partial luck, partial networking, right? But I do think by finding a teacher, community leader, co-founder, one of those three things, or maybe a myriad of those, you could also replicate this project if you have connections globally, somewhere in the world, right? And as far as donations, yeah, we are at Bitcoin Victoria Falls at ZeusPay.com. And we also have a Geyser fund. And so there's multiple different ways to donate to our project. You can reach out to BitcoinVictoriaFalls at gmail.com for our on-chain address. And we also have a website, BitcoinVictoriaFalls.com, which you can find any of those donation links. But yeah, we are actively accepting donations. We feel supported for our own personal budget in 2025, but we are looking at seeding some of our projects that our graduates are working on right now. I mentioned Bit Junior Academy in Space. That's being started by Walu, and they need some seed funding to support K through 12 education in Livingston. And then the gentleman Paul, who I mentioned, who is working on our website development and some of our digital design work. He goes to school in Lusaka, and he is working on a Bitcoin Campus Zambia initiative where he's going to be working with university and colleges students through the My First Bitcoin curriculum. And so he needs some seed funding as well. And he's shown a lot of proof of work, and so has Walu. And so right now we feel pretty secure in what we need for the rest of this year at least. But we're always trying to make our best plans for the future, trying to spend our funds the most efficiently. And also trying to think about others who are starting to now show proof of work that are graduates of ours on how we can support them in furthering Bitcoin education within Zambia.
Yeah, well, that sounds amazing. It sounds like it's just going to grow and grow. And before we were talking a little bit about Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, whereas in the West, we tend to use it more as a store of value. What is the importance of using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange for long-term adoption?
It's really a question I've been wrestling a lot with because I tend to hear some vantage points in, that the merchants aren't interested or that people aren't interested in spending their sats. Again, I think it's about just connecting the dots to what is in it for the merchant, right? I go to the grocery store or I go to the local convenience store, Wawa here, right? And when I click pay, there's a multitude of different options and ways to pay, right? And if we just had something like an API software integration at my local Wawa, where there was, instead of hitting the credit card button or the cash button, I just hit the Bitcoin button and QR code pops up. Well, I want to pay all my sats are in Bitcoin on right now. So I think where the United States at least has gone from a consumer based economy is that a lot of things moved into credit cards for purchasing, and that's just what people are used to, right? A Bitcoin transaction is much more analogous to a debit transaction where it's direct. It makes that process even simpler. So I think it's just about merchant education. I think it is important for the long term trajectory of freedom within the world, but I don't necessarily see, holding or keeping it as a story of value as a hindrance. I think it's a natural evolution, unit of account to medium exchange, and I think we're going to see that. Again, I pay a lot of attention to kind of POS terminals and software API integrations, and we're getting there on the kind of stuff that's going to make it easy for merchants with if they have that education to say yes, right? I mean, my local pizza shop here that I can walk to right around the corner, when I moved back to Delaware in April of last year, I went in and started talking to him because I was considering hosting the Blue Hen Bitcoin meetups there, and he was really interested. He had a Coinbase account and had some Bitcoin and some other crypto, and he was like, "Hey, if I can take Bitcoin as payments, like sign me up. Let's figure this out, right?" And so at that point, it's all about having something that was going to work for him and his business, right? He has employees, he has cashiers, he has servers, right? It's not going to work to have one phone wallet that on the owner's phone, right? That's kind of primarily been the way of doing stuff within a hospitality, food and beverage restaurant sense right now. He really needs a POS terminal that can sit at the cashier register that's going to direct straight to his wallet as the owner, right? And so we need to, work. Those solutions are coming available, and then it's about the sales to educate the merchants on those offerings. So we're going to get there. I very much believe that Bitcoin of medium exchange is going to get there. Now, what portion of the market does that take? That's going to be different in different areas of the world, right? You see it in Zambia right now, and the phone wallets will work because there's a lot of small businesses there. There's a lot of merchants that are single owners and running a small shop, right? And they're a Blink wallet, a wallet of Satoshi, Strike even is in Zambia. Like that'll work for them. And then we can kind of slowly move them towards self-custodial solutions as well as they continue to take on more Bitcoin. So I think it's just a matter of time. I think it's just we as individuals need to continue educating, and showing what's in it for merchants. And I think at that point, I think there's actually more in it for merchants than there is for the customer to spend, right? And so there's more in it to capture a market and, have some Bitcoin on the balance sheet for, merchant, even if it's 0.5% of what they do revenue wise, right? So yeah, it's interesting and we'll get there.
And since you are an expert on payments, are you saying it's easier payments to make it in Bitcoin?
I wouldn't say I'm an expert on payments, but I'm learning about payments. I've actually downloaded a payments processing podcast to listen to and just kind of educate myself on the payments processing space, just so I can continue to learn more that's outside of the Bitcoin lens.
And the reason I ask people that question, Jeff Booth says that if Bitcoin fails as a medium of exchange, it'll fail as a store of value. And he is very knowledgeable. And I tend to agree with him. And he explained it very well on my podcast why. And so personally, I want to store my value in Bitcoin because I believe over time, Bitcoin is going to go up against the fiat currency. However, as a humanitarian, I also want to support Bitcoin businesses and support the network and the world that I want to see. So that is why personally, I am going to make payments in Bitcoin. My tendency is to save in Bitcoin. But because I am maybe not as technological as the younger crowd, my tendency is to save. But because I want to see the Bitcoin world, not the fiat world, that is why I will make the effort.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be a humanitarian thing. I think there's actually a very strong case to be made that it makes life easier, right? I can scan my Apple Pay just as fast as I can scan a QR code. And so if I have that option, I think it's all about making that option available. And I think for the merchants, there's a lot of incentive to get them on, right? Not only do you open yourself up to a market of people that own Bitcoin. Remember, in the United States, Cash App has Lightning integrated and Coinbase has Lightning integrated. So if you have a Lightning POS terminal at your business, maybe you have to teach or have a little flyer there on how to use Cash App or Coinbase in a Lightning manner to make that payment. It all becomes about optionality and education. And again, for the merchant, what's in it? Well, you're reducing transaction fees. You are getting instant settlement with no chargebacks, and you're having a potential small portion of your revenue or treasury asset that you can save for the future. So there is a lot in it for merchants. And if we can bring them the tools that are going to put the optionality in front of people, then it's just on consumers and customers to know that that option is available. And honestly, I think from somebody who has Bitcoin on a phone wallet and spends it frequently, as far as the process, I think scanning a QR code that's a Lightning point of sale system and that transaction finality happening instantly, it's quicker for me. So I think we're going to get there. I'd love to. One of the challenges that I see right now, because I do use my Apple Pay a lot, I don't like carrying around my wallet in my pocket. I'd rather just carry around my phone, right? I think Apple Pay and that like tap to pay is actually going to drive people more towards using Bitcoin because it's using your phone to make a payment, right? Now, if we could get to the point where I could load sats on a card and have that on my Apple Wallet, and then I have the choice between my credit card or my sats, that's going to make things easier. And I think there's some limitations right now, for to my understanding, Apple's regulatory barriers to allowing a Sats tap to pay system. But I saw something on Nostr recently where Calais with eCash figured out tap to pay with eCash, right? And so where I think you and Jeff Booth kind of on that same thing are right, that if it fails as a medium of exchange, it will ultimately fail as a store of value. I just don't believe that's the trajectory we're on. I think there's a lot of cool stuff happening on the medium exchange side and a lot of tools being built that are going to make things much easier for merchants. And then if we can get those merchants onboarded, which in my belief, I think I have the tools and the know-how to do so, then you can spend your sats anywhere, right? Imagine like Steak and Shake in the United States is a restaurant chain that's interested. Imagine if I get all the Steak and Shakes onboarded to a Bitcoin Lightning payments software, and then that optionality is just available to anybody who dines there, right? That's a large footprint in just one sale, right? So I think we're going to get there.
I agree. And just to be fair to Jeff, I don't think he says it's going to fail. He just said that if it did, it would. But I think because it's such a better medium of exchange, it's a free market, all the reasons that we love, it's going to succeed. And as we see in Africa, like Nigeria, Kenya, Zambia, it is already a medium of exchange, and many other places in the global south.
Yeah, look at what Tando's doing in Kenya. I mean, just amazing. Humphrey went there for the African Bitcoin conference in December and just came back raving about that. And he's like, what can we do to replicate Tando in Zambia? Because I think technologically, his understanding is that it's possible. And I think he talked to the Tando team and they said technologically it's possible. It's all about time, right? These tools take time to build. Taking Tando and replicating that same technology within Zambia's is possible, but it takes time and it takes technical know-how, and we're winning, right? The Bitcoiners are winning, right? And we have to kind of zoom out sometimes and see that. And I think sometimes, within conversations, we can get caught in the kind of pessimism or get caught in kind of the current short-term trajectory of what's going on, in the world. And there's a lot of challenges, don't get me wrong. And there's going to be a lot of speed bumps and roadblocks along the way. But I think it's inevitable. I think that there is a lot of opportunity. I think the medium exchange portion of Bitcoin is inevitable in my opinion. And it's just about time and education, and we'll get there.
Absolutely. On Noster, you have a post that basically says money started as a ledger, then it was a precious metal for centuries, then became controlled by humans, and now is a ledger again. It sounds like you're already there.
I love the ledger analogy. I think the digital gold analogy, if you talk about the layman, if you talk about most people who have heard about Bitcoin, and at this point, again, it's very, most people have heard at least the name Bitcoin, right? Most people get the digital gold analogy. They understand it. They understand the scarcity aspect. What they don't understand is that money was historically a ledger-based system, right? It was just a way of knowing who owes who to what. And I think when you can kind of combine the digital gold analogy, right? Gold isn't a ledger. It doesn't have those properties, right? And so what people, I think the next evolution of what the layman needs to understand is at the end of the day, this is just a ledger. It's a way of everybody knowing who owns what and who owes what to whom, right? And if we can really kind of tack on that ledger analogy to the digital gold analogy, I think you're going to get a lot more people understanding what the monetary properties of the system are and why it's important, right? I forget exactly where I heard that off the top of my head right now, but when I heard that, I was like, that is the way to explain it to the layman, and that ledgers as a money predated gold, right? And if you can just explain that was the original form of accounting, that was the original form of knowing, who owns what was a ledger, and we're now going back. We're predating gold on that. We're going back to the ledger-based system. I think it's really fascinating. And then you can combine that with and it still has the properties of gold in the scarcity angle. And so I think then you start to show that, we're using all of the monetary properties. Where gold is weak, Bitcoin is strong, right? Where ledgers were weak, Bitcoin is strong, right? And it's that chart where it says, it shows the different uses of money and their monetary properties and what they service. When you look at Bitcoin, it checks all the box of monetary properties, right? And so I love kind of educating on the ledger side, because I think it's really important that people understand that in addition to the digital gold analogy.
Yeah, I like that. The one thing that I would say, though, is people, non Bitcoiners, would think that the US dollar or the euro is a ledger or is working as a ledger because we see those, numbers in our bank accounts. How would you explain that?
Well, it is a ledger, but it's an unverifiable one, right? And so that comes back to verification. And it also comes back to, is there scarcity in addition to the ledger, right? So you have to combine. I'm not saying that Bitcoin's solely a ledger, right? I'm saying that it's a ledger with scarcity, which has never been humanly possible before the invention of Bitcoin, right? And then it additionally, it's verifiable, right? You can verify that ledger. Why have we gotten to this point is because the ledger that was previously invented, which is that human-based digital ledger, is unverifiable, right? What we changed, or what Satoshi changed in Bitcoin, was the verification of the ledger in a digital capacity. And so when you combine verification, scarcity, and ledger-based principles, at the end of the day, that's the revolution.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So you just got to get to maybe those 3 points and a couple more, and then you got Bitcoin.
Exactly.
So tell us, how has Bitcoin changed you the most?
It's made me more optimistic for the future and the future of my kids. I think it's like I said, I can get this way too. I have a lot of criticisms of the government and pessimism about some of the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis, and the erosion of freedom in many ways. I think I see a lot of blackpilling amongst my friends who maybe have a little Bitcoin but don't dive in into super deep, or they're kind of consistently pessimistic about the environment around them and in the direction of freedom globally, or even in the United States. And I think to me it brings a lot of optimism. I see the tools being built to enable more freedom for my son, who's 10 months right now. And I see we're probably planning on homeschooling him. And I see just a lot of opportunity of teaching him how he can take these freedom principles and expand upon them, and use these tools. And so I just think it makes me optimistic. It makes me want to keep building. I think I'm very entrepreneurial, but I think Bitcoiners are naturally entrepreneurial as well. They want to make a difference. And so to me, what it's changed about my life is seeing that I can make a difference for freedom over the long term, right? It's something that I can dedicate my life to in many capacities to advance global freedom. And that's kind of what's important to me, and how it's changed my life.
And why was it so important for you to give back? I know you said it was instilled in you, but you've gone above and beyond.
I like to stay busy. So yeah, it's instilled in me that morally and ethically giving back and doing the right thing. I grew up in the church, and I also grew up with a mother who and father who exchanged students and kind of volunteered a lot of their time in bringing other cultures into our home. And so it kind of combines my philanthropic and wanting to make a difference in the world. It combines my interest in culture and travel, and meeting people from other areas and understanding them, and wraps that all into a nice little bow of being able to make a difference, right? When Free Haven Community Initiative was founded in Livingston, Samantha, the founder, had to travel to Livingston to make a difference, right? And not that that's not great. I mean, I want to go back. I want to participate in Bitcoin Victoria Falls. I want to be there, but it can't be full time, right? Like my family's here, my friends are here, so I can go. I could go to Livingston now and spend 3 months, and take my family over, and I don't have to change out of Bitcoin. I could stay on a Bitcoin standard by going halfway across the world, right? So I think, where does the passion come from? It just comes from it being possible, and then having that background instilled as me, as a kid, and just how my life has transpired, from a cultural and philanthropic way.
Do you think Bitcoin inspires a spiritual side of us to come out?
I don't necessarily see it spiritual. I think that is a lot more. No, I don't. I don't necessarily see it that way. I think spirituality is very much related on your belief in God, and your belief in how the world came about, and your belief in the future of whether revelations and what God writes in the Old Testament and New Testament is accurate, and where we're going to go. No, I don't see it as spiritual. I see it as a technology that humans invented, and that could make a difference for people's lives and freedom. But I don't really connect the two in my mind.
Hmm. Yeah. See, maybe I asked the question wrong, but for me, it inspires me to be a better person. It gives me
Mm.
more hope for the world. And that, to me, as I become a better person, I feel that's a growth in my spirit. So
That makes sense.
so it's just a tool. It's not in itself spiritual. It's just a tool to give me hope for a better world.
Yeah, I think that absolutely makes sense. And if you're talking kind of spiritual in the realm of, being a better person and making a difference, and growing yourself spiritually and growing your own, your inner being, absolutely. As far as its connection to, religion is religion's probably the where I would draw the line there. Bitcoin isn't religious, but maybe spiritual. I could understand where you're coming from.
Okay. So we're almost at the end. Just tell us about your projects and what you're working on for the future.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a busy person. I like to keep busy, and I've got a lot of various Bitcoin projects. I would say Bitcoin Victoria Falls is the most advanced one, and the most exciting one on kind of what is shown from a proof of work capacity already. Bitcoin Montserrat is an idea. If there's anybody out there who would be interested in traveling to the Caribbean and being a co-founder with me, leading community down there, and maybe teaching my first Bitcoin course, we got a lot of people in Montserrat who are interested in that, and there's a large Bitcoin mining and energy angle to it as well. So if anybody's listening to this, I would know somebody that has interest in traveling to Montserrat for maybe 6 months at a time and teaching about Bitcoin, let me know. And then Blue Hen Bitcoin is something I started locally. It's still getting kind of roots, and I'd like to start a meetup in the local area as I continue to work on projects in Delaware. And then I'm launching Fullman. Fullman is a Bitcoin Lightning point of sale terminal for the United States. I will be distributing Apago Pay POS terminals. They're an amazing German company that has Bitcoin Lightning POS terminals. And so Fullman is my business side of Bitcoin that's just getting started. We should be launched this year at some point. And what that is both physical point of sale terminals for cashier registers, but also software API for something like I spoke about earlier with grocery stores, convenience stores, where we can integrate a Bitcoin button into their point of sale terminal and allow for payments to be made in that capacity. So I'll have distribution of the United States for Apago. And so you have Bitcoin Victoria Falls, nonprofit, philanthropic, Bitcoin Montserrat, nonprofit, philanthropic, Blue Hen Bitcoin, kind of local meetup here in Delaware that I'm looking to get off the ground. And then Fullman is the business side of things. So those are the 4 Bitcoin related projects right now on my docket.
I love it. That's amazing. I will put links to everything below. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Paul. This was a fun time, and would love to do it again in the future. Thank you for your time.
Definitely.
All right, take care.